All right. Well, good morning and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants event. My name is Joe Goreski, and I'll be your host for today. If this happens to be your first time joining us, we are all about bringing science, adventure, exploration, and conservation live into classrooms across North America and beyond. So take a moment, head over to exploringbytheseat.com, sign up for our newsletter, and you can find out about all the events we have coming up and how you can tune in live or join in a camera spot to interact with our speakers. All right. Well, we always love going into the field, and we have had the pleasure of following National Geographic Explorer and ichthyologist Joe Cutler and his team as they make their way down the Ogooue River in Gabon on the Ogooue River megatransect. So they are exploring one of Africa's last wild rivers and sampling the amazing freshwater fish biodiversity that they're finding along the way. So they are currently on the river. They are at Lambarene, one of the last large populated areas that they will visit as they make their way out towards the ocean. So let me bring Joe in live with us. Hey, Joe, how you doing?
Hi, Joe. I'm doing great. It's really good to be able to join you live from the banks of the Ogooue here in Lambarene. It's a beautiful, hot, sunny day. So excuse me if I start being all sweaty. Better to be on a video stream. That way you guys can't smell me. But it's awesome. It's really great to be here, and it's really great to be able to live stream and share some of this experience with you.
Excellent. Well, Joe, we have repeat customers, classrooms who have been following you the last, it's been about a month now. We've been doing these awesome events along the river, but there's always new groups joining. So why don't you start by telling us a little bit about the megatransect and what you're hoping to accomplish, and then, of course, catch us up on the last week.
Yeah, so our project, the Ogooue megatransect, is to survey Gabon's great river, the Ogooue River. And a lot of people don't know about the Ogooue River, but it is the fourth largest river in Africa, and more water flows out of the Ogooue than flows out of the Nile. But it's got a PR problem, a publicity problem. We don't know very much about the Ogooue. It's been very poorly explored. Even in terms of fish biodiversity, we don't really know what's out there. And it's one of the most pristine, large tropical rivers in Africa. There's only one dam in the entire watershed of the Ogooue, and there's about 4 human inhabitants per kilometer squared, making this one of the most pristine rivers in Africa and one of Africa's last wild rivers. So our goal, our project goal, has been to raft across the country of Gabon about 1,000 kilometers or 750 miles to explore the Ogooue, document the biodiversity that lives in the Ogooue, discuss with the populations who live, fish, and transport goods and materials and personnel along the Ogooue, so that we can, explore, survey, and share this incredible river, this incredible ecosystem, and this incredible country with people all around the world. So that's kind of our goal, is to explore one of Africa's last wild rivers and share that experience so that the Ogooue River will be on the map, and we can start fighting for its protection. So that's kind of the objective here. We've been out on the river for about 5 weeks now, and we're at the last big town before we reach the Atlantic Ocean. So we're right at the start of the delta, this big, huge 100-mile long delta that braids out and widens out into a big triangle that drains, a quarter of Gabon. And so from here on out, it's going to be slow moving water, lots of influence, marine influence. We're already starting to see pelicans. There are manatees all around us. There are hippos here. There's lots of big marine fishes, snappers, jacks, tarpons, sole. So we're at this really cool interface between kind of purely freshwater ecosystems and the ocean, but we're still 100 miles inland. So it's a really exciting time on our expedition. And over the last week, we've kind of done the zone from Ndjole to Lambarene, the last 2 big towns on the river. And it's slowed down a lot. No more rapids, big water. we actually crossed the confluence with the Ndjole, which is the second largest river that flows into the Ogooue. And at that confluence, the Ogooue is a mile wide, and the Ndjole is a mile wide. So it's this huge mixing point with two massive rivers. One of the things that's interesting is even though the Ogooue is a mile wide here, it's really shallow. I'm actually standing on an island in the middle of the river. It's a sandbank, and I'm going to just kind of turn around so you can see that's our tent. And these are little channels braiding through, and you can see all the way over to that forest. That's actually another island. When I point all the way over there, that's the far side of the Ogooue. So the Ogooue is just massive here, but not very deep. So we've been dragging our boat across the sand and have had no rapids since Ndjole. So a totally different ecosystem, and really it's my first time to explore this zone. So it's been really, really cool to have this opportunity to kind of explore the middle Ogooue. And tomorrow we're going to continue downstream into the Bas Ogooue and really get down into the delta and the region of the lakes, where I think there's going to be a lot of fishing pressure, a lot of fishing villages, and I think we're going to start seeing some really cool biodiversity once we get down there as well. So exciting time. But again, this is the last town, so this may be our last cell phone connection until we reach the Atlantic Ocean. So I'm really happy to be able to connect today and update you all as to how we're progressing on this expedition.
All right. Well, Joe, we're lucky to have you. And, you let me know Saturday, I think, that we could possibly do this, and classrooms jumped at it. So they're loving the opportunity to be out on the river with you, learning about the freshwater fish species, about, the issues that you're trying to bring to light about the dams potentially being built on the river and what it can do to the ecosystem. So, huge thank you to you and your team for this undertaking.
Yeah, it's been an incredible journey. There have been some difficulties. I was just commenting that, the blood underneath my fingernails finally draining out right before this call. So, there have been some hiccups and some difficulties, but it's been an awesome experience. And to have the opportunity to sample a whole river system and see how the biodiversity changes as you move downstream to the ocean has been a really cool experience for me. Very unique, and I've been very excited. And we've got a special treat today. We're actually I've got my teammates here, Megan Sixth and Hans Mipunga, and they're going to be pulling our seine net here, and we're going to hopefully be able to catch some fish here from the Ogooue and show you a little bit of kind of what the biodiversity looks like right here in this spot. Fingers crossed if we catch anything. Now, we've done a lot of sampling. We've pulled a lot of nets, thrown a lot of cast nets, and it's not every single day that you catch something. So don't hold your breath. They may be working really hard behind me, but they may not actually catch anything. But if they do, I'll be sure to run over, check out the fish, and identify them for you so that you can also see kind of what we're seeing out here.
Joe, can you take us a little closer so we can see what they're up to?
Yeah, let me walk on over here. So they're pulling a little seine net here along the beach. Now, this is a great way to sample sandy habitats. Oh, I see some fish moving. Whoa, there we go. All right, we've got at least a few fish species here. Let me grab the buckets. All right, plop them in, plop them in. So I'm seeing a few different fish genera. This is a Ryamas buchholzi. It's a minnow, a cyprinid, but it's a predator. I think it eats insects. And the amazing thing is it has no teeth in its mouth, and it's actually got no stomach. So it's a predator with no teeth and no stomach.
Joe, can you lower the camera slightly?
Yep. Sorry about that, Joe.
No worries.
We've got a Brycinus epistotania here. You see it's got the little black band on its tail. Now, this is a carassiform, a cousin of a piranha. And they've also got pretty impressive teeth. even though they're a really teeny tiny fish. Now, most of the diversity we're catching here on the sandbanks are actually ryamas. So a couple nights ago, we were fishing, doing the same thing, pulling the seine, and we caught 1,206 ryamas in 10 pulls of the seine. And it was just like buckets full of fish. And every fish that we catch, we identify the species level and we count them. So Hans is going to stick his hands in here and show us, one of the bigger fish we caught on this seine pull, a Ryamas bucholzi. And they're actually really beautiful. They've got these nice little vertical bars, and they've got a nice yellow coloration and a little green spot on the tail. And they're super jumpers. So we've got to always put the lids on the bucket really quick, or else all the fish start jumping out of the bucket and wiggling their way back down into the water. So that's one seine pull. And what have we got? Probably 50, 60, 70 specimen, representing 2 fish species, 2 different fish families. Really cool. And they're going to start getting ready to pull the seine again here. So I'm going to just focus on filming for a second. Okay. So Hans is taking the deep end of the seine, and the seine is a really simple net. It's just a little net, 20 feet long, strung between 2 poles. It's got a line of floaters on the top and a lead line on the bottom. So it basically just circles through the water and pulls up everything that happens to be swimming in that zone at the time. We've got a few more ryamas here and a lot of foam and sand. So we're kind of on the back side of this island here, and it's kind of a little bit of slack water behind us. And so a lot of foam and debris kind of accumulates here. Now with our little seine net, we're mostly catching small species, but there are people in this area who pull really huge seine nets, 200, 300 feet long. And what they're trying to catch is a fish that's locally called sand gnome, without name. It's a species that's introduced. It's invasive here in Gabon. It's a Heterodus niloticus. It's the Nile arapaima. And these are huge honking fish, 4, 5 feet long, and they're big time jumpers, and they've got scales that are razor sharp and can cut you all over. And so it's one of the most heavily exploited fish species here in Gabon. And what's crazy about these Heterodus niloticus, they were introduced here in Lambarene in 1960, but now they have expanded their range all throughout Gabon, and they're swimming up the Ogooue River all the way almost to Franceville, where our megatransect started. And that's been one of the really key findings that we've had on this expedition, is that the invasive Heterodus niloticus is a lot more widespread than we ever imagined. Now, we don't really know what the impacts of this introduction have been, but I assume that it's really had a huge impact on the freshwater ecosystems, because they're extremely abundant, they're extremely large, and right now they are everywhere. So that's a little bit of how we sample. We do a lot of seining in these types of habitats because it's a really effective way to sample everything that's living on the sandbanks. But if we're in a habitat that's more rocky or with faster moving water, it's almost impossible to pull a seine net. So in those scenarios, we throw a cast net. And I think that we'll give Megan a few minutes. She's going to grab a cast net and get all set up, and we can show you how we throw the cast net so that you can see another one of our sampling methods.
Very cool, Joe. Great work by Hans and Megan on that netting for us. Really cool to see how it worked.
Yeah, they're both experts. Hans is a scientist here with CNRS, the Centre National de Recherche et Technologie. And Megan has been pulling seine nets with me since I met her. So they're both really good at pulling the seine. And that way I can just be here taking the video calls and I don't have to do any of the sampling. I feel pretty lucky in that case.
Joe, I'm going to pop my screen up just for a minute and let's look at a few other fish. We won't go through all the pictures, but I've got a few here that we can take a look at.
Yeah, so this fish is one of my favorites here in Gabon. It's a hepsatus, an African pike. And you can hardly see it in the photo, but this fish has crazy teeth. So this is really like the closest thing we've got in Gabon to a piranha. It's a super predator, and their teeth are just terrifying. So when I caught this fish with a hook and line, I made sure to hold it and keep my fingers out of its mouth, because if that thing bit me, I'd been really well cut. And this is a big time predator. It ate a fish that was probably half its length. So I was hoping to catch a really big fish. Instead, I caught a really aggressive fish. So these are really cool fish. I love them. This fish is actually a goby. This was the first marine fish that we caught in fresh water on this expedition. Now, these gobies, they swim hundreds of kilometers upstream. And what's interesting is we found for the first time that they probably are reproducing in fresh water. So we dissected a few individuals and we found that they had ripe eggs inside of them. So that indicates to me, it's not proof, but it's a strong indication that they're breeding in fresh waters. And so this is a big time migrant. It spends part of its time in the estuary, part of its time in the ocean, but it seems like it breeds in fresh water. Now, I'm going to say every fish is one of my favorite fish, but I love this fish. This is a petrocephalus. This is one of the smartest fishes in the world. It's got a giant brain. Its brain is about 3% of its total body weight. For context, human brain is about 2.5% of our total body weight. Now, these fish are considered weakly electric fish, and they produce an electric current by that little narrow bit right before the tail called the caudal peduncle. And so they've got what's like a little battery pack to shoot out little bits of electricity, and they use it to communicate and to navigate and to orient in fresh waters. And these fish are one of the only fish that sings to find mates. So during the breeding period, the males make a special call in order to draw in other female mormyrids. Now, these ones that you see, oh, wow. This is a Shilbe multitenniatus. This is one of the preferred food fishes here in Gabon. They're called Yara locally, but the scientific name, the common name for these fish are the butter catfishes. They're absolutely delicious. They have like perfect, delicious meat with no bones in them. And what's interesting is that individual is an adult. There are many species of Shilbe here in Gabon, but the multitenniatus, that is the largest individual I've ever seen. And when we dissected that fish, it was also full of big, ripe eggs. So there's another species of Shilbe here in Gabon, the Shilbe grenfili, and those get to be about 3 feet long. Now, these multitenniatus, the other species with a big flat head, that's about as big as they get, and that's probably about a 12-inch long fish. Very beautiful fish.
All right, very cool, Joe. Some really neat biodiversity.
Oh yeah, it's amazing how different the fish are here than the fishes that we see in the United States, for example, but also how many similarities there are when you look around the world at fish biodiversity, because in the same habitats here, you'll find something very similar in the same habitats, for example, in the Amazon. So it's been really fun to kind of compare notes with other ichthyologists who are studying other river systems. But I think that Megan and Hans are ready to kind of show off their cast netting ability here. So I'm going to walk over and approach them a little bit. So
all right. Classrooms are excited, especially Mrs. Hall's class. They're ready.
They've both got a cast net. And the thing about cast netting is you've really got to make sure everything is organized and neat before you throw. Otherwise, Hans is jumping in after the fish. He's a little excited. If you don't really clean up your net and make sure everything is nice and clean, you don't get a nice spread like that. And so the nice thing about cast netting is you can do it in any habitat type. You can do it in the middle of the rapids. You can do it in the waterfalls. You can do it in the small creeks, and you can do it on the sand. I think that here in Lambarene, the fish are adapted to cast netting because it's really been hard for us to catch fish with our cast nets, but we've seen a lot of other people fishing with cast nets. So I think that they've learned, hey, be aware when you're seeing a net fly over and land on top of you, you better swim the other way. So we spent about an hour cast netting yesterday, and I think I only caught about 5 fish, and I was working my butt off. All right, here we go. Another throw. And if there's anything, by pulling like that, the cast net closes, and any fish that are inside should remain inside. Looks like Megan's got nothing there. We'll give Hans another toss and see if he can catch something. And then I will turn the camera back onto myself.
All right.
All right. There we go.
Looked like nice, a good one.
Spread. Yeah. I'll tell you, it takes some expertise throwing these cast nets. They weigh about 10 pounds each, and you've got to swing it in a perfect, you've got to swing it really smoothly and throw it perfectly. Otherwise, you just don't catch anything. All right. Looks like we've got empty nets. So I'm going to turn the camera back onto myself. We're about 22 minutes in. Those are 2 of our favorite ways to sample on this expedition. We've been doing it everywhere. This is our 32nd site that we've sampled. And the other way that we sample is with little dip nets. So in really small creeks, tiny little like puddles. We've got little tiny hand nets like you'd use for an aquarium. And you just go through with a headlamp, you shine it on the fish, and then you can scoop them right up. So those have been the 3 ways plus hook and line that we've been sampling fish biodiversity on this expedition. And we've caught thousands of fish.
All right. Awesome work, Joe. I think it's time we start getting a little Q&A action going. So those who are tuning in via Facebook and YouTube, now's your chance. Let us know where you're watching from. Send us in some questions. Let's start hanging out with our students on camera. So we're going to start off. We're going to go to Mount Airy in North Carolina. We've got some 5th graders hanging out with Mrs. Haynes. Let me bring them in there. All right. How we doing, boys and girls?
Good. Hello. Ask your question. How do you charge y'all's things and how devices and how much longer until you reach those?
So we're in a town like, we usually spend one day going to town. We find some friendly person and we say, hey, can we borrow some electricity? We've got to charge our drone. We've got to charge our telephones. We've got to charge our computers, our GPS, our headlamps, everything. And so we spend about a day in every town just charging our electronics and also backing up our photographs and the data we've collected. So in every town, we take the opportunity to use electricity when it's available. We've also got a tiny generator that in a pinch, if there are no towns around, like what we're going to see from here all the way out to the ocean, we can light up the generator and we can charge our electronics that way. And, you know, nobody has done a project like this on the Ogooue in 140 years. So we don't really know how long it's going to take for us to get out to the ocean. I'm expecting somewhere between 2 weeks, 3 weeks, maybe a month. And we've got about 100 miles to go. It really depends on how quickly the water's moving and how strong the tidal influence is, because the tides actually push water all the way up to Lambarene. So if we're trying to go down when the tide is rising, we'll be moving really slowly. The other thing that we need to worry about is the rainy season has just started. So the water is rising really quickly. We've actually had to pull up our boat twice since arriving in Lambarene because the water is climbing. And so pretty soon, all these islands are going to disappear and it's going to get a lot less comfortable. So we've got to worry about the tides. We've got to worry about the slow water, and we've got to worry about the big tropical rainstorms that are coming. But I imagine 2 weeks or maybe a month more, and we should be arriving at the mouth of the Ogooue in Ozuri.
Gotta remember that mic. Joe, what was the distance between Ndjole and Lambarene?
The distance between Ndjole and Lambarene was about 75 miles, and that took us about a week of paddling. Now, we weren't paddling all day, every day. What we wanted to do, there were some really cool rivers coming into the Ogooue in that zone. So what we did was we stopped at the mouth of the Ngounye, we stopped at the mouth of the Mbumi, and we stopped also at the mouth of, there's a bunch of lakes here that are attached to the Ogooue. And so we wanted to stop at those sites to see if the fish diversity, if we'd see kind of a combination of fish diversity from the rivers and the main stem of the Ogooue. And what I can tell you is we've actually seen more fish biodiversity in between Ndjole and Lambarene than we have anywhere else. There were some sites where we're catching 23, 24, 25 species of fish in an hour. And up until we reached Ndjole, the most we had collected at a single site was 20 species. So we're seeing a lot more biodiversity now that we're moving out toward the coast.
All right. Let's bring in Mrs. Foster's Raiders.
Good. Hello. Do you have any special permits to do the research on this lake, or can anyone visit and research?
So I'm working directly with Gabon's Ministry of Scientific Research and a university in here in Gabon. So that helps to facilitate the access to do research here. Now, anybody can come and visit, and anybody can come and fish. But if you want to actually, sample and take specimen from Gabon and take them back to the United States, then you're going to need a research permit and a collection permit and also an export permit. And thankfully, with my collaborators here, that's been easy. Now, I've been working in Gabon since 2014. So a lot of the preparation for this expedition was done years ago. And so, for me, it's fairly easy to get those permits and the permissions. But I would say if you want to come and study the freshwater fish in Gabon, send me an email and I'll help make sure that you can get your research permits so that you can also collect here, because it's really cool.
All right, let's bring Mr. Mr. Armstrong into the call. Grade 6, 7, 8 join in Ontario, Canada. If you want to go ahead and unmute Mr. Armstrong, we'd love to grab a question.
Sure, my students have a bunch of questions, but the last one was whether or not you can see that a fish is pregnant without actually cutting it open.
You can guess if a fish is pregnant, but you don't know until you've cut them open. So some fish, you see them and you're like, wow, that's a really fat fish. Maybe it's pregnant, but also maybe it's just eaten a lot of food recently, and that's why it's looking really fat. So, we've cut open a lot of fish on this expedition. We've got a collaborator here in Gabon who studies fish parasites. So we've been extracting we've been cutting open a lot of fish, pulling out all the guts and putting them in a little tissue tube so that our collaborator, Adelaide, can actually go and look to identify fish parasites. So that's been one of our objectives when we've been opening up these fish, is just to see whether or not we're seeing parasites. But at the same time, if we're seeing a fish pregnant full of eggs, we're making a note of that because I think it's really important. We know very little about the biology of these species, when they breed, where they breed, how long they live. And if we want to manage fisheries here in Gabon, we need to know that basic biology before we can do so. So unfortunately, it's not easy to tell if a fish is pregnant unless you've cut the fish open. But sometimes you have to sacrifice things for science. And I at least feel, I can rest assured that our sampling is minimally impacting the fishes of the Ogooue, because almost everything that we're collecting, we're actually releasing. So most of the specimen that we've collected have gone back healthy into their native environment. what we've been doing is we've been counting, identifying, and photographing our specimen and then releasing them. So I think of the thousands of fish we've caught, probably 95 or 99% of the fish have been returned back into their native habitat without any problems. And that's one of the things I'm really happy about. And one of our objectives here has been to minimally impact the ecosystem. Every time we set up camp, we make sure that there is no garbage remaining on the beach after us. There's nothing left except for footprints. And when we can avoid it, we don't kill fish. In my past research for my PhD thesis, I killed over 20,000 fish from Gabon. And I feel really happy that on this expedition, we haven't had to do that. We've been able to use other tools and other ways to document biodiversity. We've been using iNaturalist as our main way of documenting biodiversity and biogeography here on the Ogooue River. And if you want to help us with our identifications, we've got a project on iNaturalist called the Ogooue megatransect, and anybody can go in and help us to identify the fishes and the birds and the insects that we've been seeing along this expedition. So with iNaturalist, we've been able actually to release most of the fish back into their native environment. So we've sacrificed a few for science, but just a small fraction of what we've collected.
All right, let's jump to another classroom. Miss Wilmot's class is joining us in Dobson. Let me get their microphone on. How are we doing, girls?
Hello.
Okay.
Do you get money for doing expeditions?
I don't get any money for doing expeditions. So I applied from National Geographic, and they are supporting this project. But almost my entire grant went into that boat and the materials that we're using here in the field. I don't have a salary. I don't have a job. I'm doing this because I'm passionate about it, because I believe in it. And I believe that if we don't do this, this Ogooue River could be dammed. It could be destroyed. And I'm hoping that with this expedition, we're going to be able to protect this ecosystem. And I'm still young. I don't need to worry about a big job or a big salary yet. Maybe later in life, I'll worry about money. But right now, I'm worried about the experience and the conservation because I care a lot about protecting freshwater ecosystems. And nobody's done a project on the Ogooue in 140 years. And I feel really well suited to do that. So I don't have any salary from this project. And it's going to take me a long time to do it. But that's not why I'm here. So no money for my pocket. Enough money to support the expedition.
All right, good stuff, Joe. Pretty awesome. Mrs. Hall's class, 5th graders in Mount Airy, North Carolina. If you want to pop up, there we go.
How deep is the river?
So right here, I can step in the water. It's about ankle deep where I am right here. And I could probably walk a little ways out. And you can see I'm about knee deep now. And still about knee deep. Still about, actually now it's getting shallower again, just below my knees. So right here, it's not very deep. The river is so vast here that it's actually quite shallow. But we've passed places where the Ogooue is really narrow. There's one spot just after Lope where we know that is 60 meters deep. That's 180 feet deep. So there are spots here on the Ogooue where it's a really deep river. But right here around Lambarene, it is very shallow. And we've had a lot of problem navigating our raft because we keep running into sand that is right underneath the surface. So there have been areas that's been very deep, and there have been areas that have been very shallow. But with the rainy season now arriving, the water is going to rise really quickly. So the water here, it'll rise probably 10 meters. All of this area around me will be flooded. It actually floods into the forest. So the river that we're seeing today, 3 months from now, is going to look totally different. So it's not very deep right here, but in a few months, it'll be a lot deeper. And in some other areas here on the Ogooue, it's really deep, really rocky, and really fast moving. Here, it's pretty slow, wide, and high productivity.
All right. Grab another question.
How do you collect your data on fish, and what do you do when you're finished?
So what we're collecting mostly is biodiversity. So at every site that we've sampled, we've identified all the specimens we've collected and we've counted them. And I want to be able to say, okay, starting in Franceville in the upper Ogooue and going all the way out to the coast, what species of fish do we see and how abundant are they? And what I'm going to do with that data when I'm finished is I'm going to publish a report to share with the scientific community, but also with the Gabonese government to say, look at the Ogooue River, look at the richness of the Ogooue River. Just for the fish, I think we're well over 50, 60, maybe 70 species of fish already at 31 sites, which is a lot of biodiversity. And one of the other things that we want to look at is how connected the Ogooue River system is. There are 14 proposed dams on this river. And if those proposed dams go in, they will block fish migration. Now, what we've seen is marine fishes are swimming halfway across Gabon, at least 400 kilometers or 250 miles upstream. And there are some species, like those Ryamas that we just caught, the Ryamas buckholzi, you find those all the way up at the source, up in Franceville. So there are some species that clearly are moving up and down the Ogooue. And if these dams go in, that's going to block fish migration. So my goal is to sample the biodiversity, explain a little bit about the biogeography, and then hopefully use that information to convince decision makers to protect this river and keep it natural for generations to come.
All right, Mr. Armstrong, if you want to go ahead and unmute, we'll grab another question.
Sure. I have a bunch of questions from students. How can you tell the gender of a fish was one? Go ahead.
For some species, it's really easy. And for other species, it's really hard. So, for example, in the killifish here, the males are very showy and flashy, and their coloration helps them attract females. And the females are all drab, and you actually can't distinguish species if you only have a female specimen. So for some species, it's very easy. In the more myrids, the ones with the huge brains, the males have a little notch in one of their fins. So that's very easy to see from the outside. For other species, you can't distinguish males or females unless you cut them open and see whether they have ovaries or testes. So there's a lot of dissection if you want to be an ichthyologist.
All right. Mrs. Haynes, do you guys have another question? Here they come.
What is your daily basis? Like, what do you do every day?
Yeah, so that's a great question because we've got into a good routine now. We wake up somewhere between 5:30 and 6. I roll out of bed and I start heating up coffee. I start heating up water because coffee is my number one thing in the morning. By 7 a.m., we're eating Quaker oats and coffee and having milk. And when we have it, bread's a big luxury for us here. And we eat our little breakfast. We break down the tents. We pack up all the stuff into the dry bags and in the dry cases. And then we load up the raft, load up the personnel, and we start paddling. And we'll paddle, probably until about 4 p.m. Or if we find a really cool spot where we want to stop and sample, we'll stop a little bit early. But we'll paddle all day, arriving at our site about 4 p.m. We get out of the raft, pull all the stuff back out, unpack, put up the tents, and start cooking dinner. Our dinner's usually ready at about 5 p.m. because we want to eat before we start sampling. Our sampling usually goes from about 6 p.m. Till about 7:30 p.m., depending on the site. And we want that time because it's the transition from daytime to nighttime. And a lot of fish are hiding during the day, but they come into the shallows at night. So we can see both the daytime fish, the evening fish, and the nighttime fish by sampling that time period. And so by 7:30, 8 p.m., we're done processing our specimen. We've eaten dinner. Everybody's totally exhausted, and we all go to sleep. And I'll tell you, I've been going to sleep at about 8 p.m. And if I'm up till like 8:30, I'm totally exhausted the next day. We've been basically living by the sun's rhythm, waking up with the sunrise, going to sleep as soon as the sun's setting, and we're done sampling. So it's been an incredible opportunity to get reconnected with nature for us out here. We've totally forgotten the problems of the real world. Here on the Ogooue, coronavirus is not a major risk, but hippos and rapids and crocodiles are. So we're totally vigilant during the day. And at the end of the day, when we go to bed, I've been sleeping like a dead man every night. And waking up feeling very refreshed in the morning.
All right, Joe, we're going to squeeze in one more question here. We'll visit Tuscaloosa one more time.
What type of wildlife have you encountered while working on the river?
Oh, all sorts of wildlife. Pelicans, we're seeing terns, we're seeing African skimmers, we've seen forest elephants, we've seen sitatunga, yellowback duiker, red river hogs, so many different kinds of monkeys I can't even explain, chimpanzees, lots and lots of diversity. They have giant monitor lizards that live here in the river and fish. We've seen snakes swimming across the river with us. And I imagine that if you just went a little ways into the forest, you'd see a lot more biodiversity as well. Gabon is a super rich country in terms of large mammal diversity. 90% of the remaining forest elephants are found here in Gabon. And we've been lucky enough to see several of them on this expedition. Lots of forest buffalo, all the animals that you don't want to run into when you're on foot. But when you're in the raft, you're totally happy to just float past them and they don't bother you at all. So we're entering the zone with the hippos and the giant crocodiles. And I'm a little bit more worried about that. But I love to see them anyway. So it's not a concern. It's actually a really fun part of the expedition.
All right. Well, let's start things off. A huge thank you to everyone who tuned in via YouTube and Facebook. A huge thank you to our camera classrooms. Thank you for the great questions. Joe, to you, your team, Megan and Hans today, thank you for those awesome demonstrations. There they are. Hey, Hans.
Somewhere.
Megan's over there somewhere. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking us on another to see another part of the Ogooue, and best of luck over the next few weeks, and fingers crossed we get a cell phone signal somewhere.
Yeah, I really hope we'll be able to reconnect. This next zone is going to be amazing, just as everything else has been amazing. And it's really cool to be able to broadcast live from the field. I'm so grateful for the entrance and the classrooms that have tuned in thus far, and everybody tuning in on YouTube and Facebook. It's been really cool to be able to share this opportunity.
All right. Awesome. Well, we will let you most likely cool down in the river, maybe have a bite to eat. Thanks so much, Joe. Safe travels. And at the very least, we look forward to catching you on the coast.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.